So in building these REST systems, you might be thinking to yourself, how much should I be implementing in my particular case? Leonard Richardson came up with something called the REST maturity model. You can see a link at the bottom here if you want to read more about it. But the idea is simply that different systems can be talked about as being a certain level of what he calls mature based on certain attributes. So level 0 is sort of the minimum of any API on the web. You're doing some API and you're using HTTP. This could be RPC with XML. It could be RPC in CGI returning binary objects. It doesn't matter. It's just saying that you have an API and it's working over HTTP. Level 1 of the maturity model says you're using resources and identity of resources in your model so that when you're going to food/12, it's always going to return the food that's identified by that number 12. Level 2 indicates that you're using HTTP verbs to do most of the operations so that a get, put, post, patch, and delete all do the sorts of things you would expect from those operations. And level 3 is the HADOS or hypermedia level. That is really where you're going to be supporting hypermedia, self-describing objects, including links to move from state to state in your results. So this maturity model can be helpful, but it also can be a cudgel that developers are beaten with. So I'd like to leave this course with just a bit of a talk about the pragmatism about this all. The model is certainly useful, but be careful about using it to grade implementations and developers. When I'm building an API, I take as much of this maturity as I can as is helpful for my API. I want to build just enough maturity into the API that is helpful for the users. So if I'm using things like a full HADOS implementation and I'm even maybe using code on demand, I'm probably expecting that the clients for that are going to be fairly automated and sophisticated clients. But if I'm building a simple API that I'm writing for a simple mobile app, I may only be doing level 1 or level 2. I'm usually starting at least at level 1 and probably level 2 as well, but going down the deep end into the hypermedia probably isn't necessary for some of the APIs you're going to be building. I like to say that overbuilding an API is much worse than underbuilding. And if we look at versions of different APIs out there, the Twitter API, the GitHub API is a good example, even the Facebook API, you can see that sometimes versions of those APIs tend to be really overly complex, and then they tend to pull back and simplify them. So I'd rather underbuild your API than overbuild. Your users are ultimately who you're trying to serve, and making it easy for them to implement calls to your API while fulfilling the requirement of what they're trying to do is really your goal with an API. Not being able to go to a user group or to a conference and say, well, you know, my API is level 3, therefore I'm a smarter or a brighter developer. Please don't get caught up in worrying about the dogma of the Richardson maturity model, or of being in the graces of what we want to call a fully REST-compliant API. You're writing code to fulfill the requirements of your system, and that's all. Let's wrap it up.